So, I'm fairly sure most of you watching are already aware of the absolutely immeasurable number of pieces of fan media that has come from the My Little Pony fandom over the course of its 10+ year history. Tons of things like animations or nostalgic MLP fan songs have tens of millions of total views on YouTube, and that's not even mentioning everything else such as MLP fan games, and the even more massive amount of stuff like online pony fan art in general. Now, in the midst of watching and enjoying all these pony fan works, one might kinda start to forget sometimes that at the end of the day, Hasbro, the giant toy and media company who owns and has owned the My Little Pony brand since its inception in the 1980s, to a certain extent also kinda owns everything here made by MLP fans too. What I mean by that is how a lot of these things made by MLP fans obviously in some way show or depict stuff from the My Little Pony IP, such as characters or the settings therein. To give a quick example, if somebody makes something like an animation with Twilight Sparkle in it, Hasbro doesn't own the animation, but what they do own is Twilight Sparkle as a fictional character they have the copyright to, which the creator of said animation is making use of without permission, and is then therefore infringing upon their copyright. With that said, this is of course a problem the vast majority of pony fan artists and whatnot don't have to worry about. I will explain a bit more later, but this is mainly because there is usually no incentive for Hasbro to actually pursue any type of action against random people uploading fan art of Rainbow Dash to DeviantArt or whatever. However though, there are in fact a few exceptions to this. Over the years, Hasbro has directly intervened and effectively shut down multiple different MLP fan projects through the form of sending cease and desist letters, which, if you don't know, are basically the formal legal way of telling someone, stop what you are doing immediately or we will sue you. And the people on the receiving end of these letters are forced to comply, because, unsurprisingly, a lot of MLP fans are not willing to fight a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Hasbro in court. So today, let's take a small look back on the interesting history of a few notable examples of Hasbro sending cease and desist letters to people in the My Little Pony fandom, and why exactly they did so in the first place. So, first of all, allow me to introduce you to something called MLP Online. An MLP fan game in the style of a 2D MMORPG, which started development all the way back in early 2011, and was first revealed to the rest of the Brony fandom in April of that year, with a YouTube video showing off a demo of the game. Following this, MLP Online quickly became one of the most anticipated and hyped up fan projects in the whole pony fandom. Mostly because the idea of an entire massive multiplayer game all about My Little Pony, where you play as a pony going on quests and adventures in Equestria, was simply just quite appealing to a lot of people. For the next year and a half, the small team behind MLP Online would slowly continue developing more of the game and showing off teasers/demos. However, unfortunately, only a few days after they released a much anticipated single-player demo version of their game to the public, they were suddenly hit with a cease and desist order from Hasbro, complaining about copyright and trademark infringement in regards to them using characters from My Little Pony in MLP Online. At first, they were seemingly unsure if the complaint was actually from Hasbro or not, or if it was just some random troll, but it quickly became apparent that it was in fact the real deal. So, after a while of attempting to negotiate with Hasbro, they were eventually left with no other choice but to take down the download link for the demo on their website, and immediately stop development on the game as a whole. A few weeks later, the team then made a forum post fully explaining what happened, announcing the MLP online project was now officially dead thanks to Hasbro, and that they were moving on to making other MLP-inspired fan games that were hopefully less prone to copyright problems. This situation is especially notable because it was one of the first truly big instances of Hasbro sending a cease and desist to the devs of something like a popular My Little Pony fan game. It effectively not only set a precedent for people in the fandom that Hasbro was in fact willing to take down things like this, but in hindsight, it was also sort of ominous foreshadowing for more stuff to come. Another notable example of Hasbro directly intervening in something related to the My Little Pony fandom is the Jan Animations situation. I actually talked about this for a bit in my previous video, which you should watch by the way, but basically, Jan Animations, an MLP fan animator who kinda rose to stardom in the earlier days of the fandom for creating numerous different high-quality show-accurate animations, was sent a cease and desist order by a law firm representing Hasbro in March of 2014. The cease and desist letter itself, which you're currently looking at, was posted online for the entire MLP fandom to see shortly afterwards. In it, Jan Animations was effectively told that he had infringed upon Hasbro's intellectual property with his show-accurate MLP animations, and that he had to immediately take down any My Little Pony related videos on his YouTube channel. And so, he was forced to comply. And aside from making a few posts announcing that, yes, he had in fact been sent a cease and desist from Hasbro, not much other information would be revealed for about the next year and a half. That was until in November of 2015, when Jan released a video to his channel basically giving a more comprehensive explanation as to what had happened. In the video, he claimed that over the course of the past year and a half or so, he had been in a painstakingly slow back and forth between multiple people at Hasbro as to if he could ever make MLP animations again. And apparently, they never once gave him a clear answer in that span of time. He said that despite sending numerous inquiries through email, and even having a full-on conference call with a few people from the company once, the only actual progress which was ever made was him being allowed to reinstate a specific few of his animations, namely stuff like the Don't Mine at Night pony parody. But aside from that, he had basically wasted over a year waiting around for a concrete answer that never came as to if he could ever continue making MLP stuff or not. It got even more egregious when all the contacts he had at Hasbro just straight up ghosted him and stopped responding. He also speculated that the reason they never just gave him a quite simple yes or no answer was potentially because they didn't want to further upset people in the Brony/MLP fandom. So instead, they chose to lead Jan on a prolonged back and forth of vague nothing answers in the hopes he would eventually just quietly lose interest and give up. Considering that this would all be oddly specific stuff to lie about, I think it's safe to say Jan was probably telling the truth in this video. So even if you forget about the cease and desist itself for a moment, this is still probably one of the most scummiest things Hasbro has ever done to anybody in the My Little Pony community in general. With that said though, the third and final notable instance of Hasbro sending a cease and desist I want to mention is another situation involving a pretty popular MLP fan game. This time, one called Fighting is Magic. having first begun development in 2011 when a small group of MLP fans under the name Main 6 got inspired to make a My Little Pony-themed fighting game after they saw a few mock-ups of the same idea online. It quickly became one of, if not maybe the single most hyped up pony fan games in the fandom during the early 2010s. The Main 6 team were developing it using a game engine called Fandom 2K, and despite a few hiccups along the way, such as an early pre-release build of Fighting is Magic getting leaked by a beta tester, they were still making good progress throughout 2011 and 2012. And in early 2013, the game even came 4th place in a competition held for charity to decide what the 8th featured title at the EVO 2013 fighting game tournament would be. For context, EVO isn't just some random local game tournament held in some dude's basement or whatever. It's quite literally the biggest one in the entire world, with thousands of attendees each year. However, it appears as though Fighting is Magic, a game which was infringing on the MLP copyright, actually getting slightly close to getting into such a publicly well-known event, would inevitably be what finally caught the attention of Hasbro. A few days after the charity competition, and reportedly only a few weeks before the 1.0 version was set to be completed and released, Hasbro sent a cease and desist letter to the Main 6 team, telling them to stop all development on it immediately. They were already seemingly aware they were sort of walking on thin ice, due to their status of being one of the most popular fan games in the community, but nevertheless, after a few days of apparently attempting to negotiate with lawyers, they were inevitably forced to comply with Hasbro's demands and stop developing the game. A few days afterwards, the Main 6 team broke the news to the fandom and also made a lengthy mega post going into further detail on what exactly happened, plus confirming that Fighting is Magic, in its current incarnation at least, was officially dead. It goes without saying that a lot of people who were anticipating the game weren't happy with the news that it was never going to be released, and it was sort of all chaos for a few days. However, it wasn't completely all doom and gloom though, as in the middle of this controversy, Lauren Faust, the literal creator of MLP Friendship is Magic itself, who had apparently been a fan of the project, straight up just tweeted at the Main 6 team, saying that she could help them design some original characters. And as some of you may know, this offer would ultimately be the primary catalyst for the dev team's spiritual successor to Fighting is Magic, them Fightin' Hordes, or TFH for short. As you can see, it is a completely original game, with new characters and settings, that is by most accounts fairly well received and successful, with it being available to purchase on not only Steam, but also consoles like Xbox and the PS5. And most importantly, it's also more than safe from the grasps of Hasbro. So, oddly enough, Hasbro effectively shutting down the Fighting is Magic project was, in a way, sort of a blessing in disguise, because if it didn't happen, the Main 6 dev team wouldn't have been forced into a position where they really had no other choice but to start making something like them Fightin' Hordes, which has debatably created a far bigger legacy than Fighting is Magic ever hypothetically could have. Well, with that said, the past three things I've talked about, MLP Online, the Jan Animations situation, and Fighting is Magic, are all pretty big notable examples that should give you a good idea of the type of stuff Hasbro was willing to take down. These of course aren't the only 3 times this has happened though. There have been numerous other instances of them taking down stuff by people in the MLP fandom. In May of 2012, they apparently pressured DeviantArt to ask a popular custom pony plushie creator on their website called White Dove to take down their commission prices for plushies. Several months earlier, in December 2011, Hasbro sent the Pony Archive, a website which hosted free downloads to 1080p rips of episodes of MLP Friendship is Magic, a cease and desist through email. And the Pony Archive decided to respond to them by saying verbatim, and I quote, "Thanks for your concern. Since we are merely spreading friendship and magic, we feel that we're protected by Princess Celestia herself. Please feel free to download the episodes from our website in order to learn about accepting, friendship, and happiness too." What a legendary way to respond to a literal legal takedown notice. And finally, the most recent example I could find of Hasbro taking down something from the MLP fandom was only from a few years ago back in 2021. It was a My Little Pony themed dating simulator game called Ponytail Adventures. Truly nothing is ever really safe from the wrath of Hasbro, huh? With that all said and done though, you've probably been wondering why exactly did Hasbro even decide to send all these cease and desists to those aforementioned MLP fan projects instead of just leaving them alone or something. Like, at a glance, it almost seems cartoonishly mean and unnecessary for them to go around shutting down things like these small fan projects and whatnot, which were just made by dedicated fans of My Little Pony. And you're not alone on that. The main three examples which I talked about were all very big controversies in the MLP fandom, with tons of people such as bronies getting quite upset at Hasbro in the process. Well, the answer as to why is 5 words. The United States copyright law. I want to preface, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take legal advice from the TobbyMLP YouTube channel, but I do want to play devil's advocate for just a moment. The reality is that the vast majority of cease and desists I've mentioned in this video aren't entirely Hasbro's fault. Basically, whenever somebody creates and uploads a piece of fan art they made of a pony like Rainbow Dash, for example, to the internet, that can technically be considered a form of IP infringement, and is thus illegal. But of course, most people don't have to actually worry about this, because Hasbro is more than content to simply ignore small infractions, and focus their time and company resources on far more important stuff. The actual problem, though, arises whenever an MLP fan project that is infringing on Hasbro's IP begins to take itself more seriously, as in to a point where it has a genuine level of professional feeling polish to it. The problem starts to become even more concerning if said highly polished fan project in question starts to become more and more well-known. Not just in the MLP or Brony fandom itself, but also in the public eye in general. Good examples of this are the very accurate MLP animations by Jan Animations getting millions of views on YouTube, or Fighting is Magic placing quite well in a competition for a chance to be played at the biggest fighting game tournament in the world. The truth is that stuff infringing on the MLP copyright, getting this highly publicized, will not go unnoticed by Hasbro. So, by creating such a popular and good quality fan work, so strongly and fundamentally tied to the My Little Pony IP, these fan projects accidentally place Hasbro in a precarious position, where due to US copyright laws, any lack of action on their part would be implicitly granting them a license for their project, which is something they do not want to happen for a number of reasons. The most notable reason being that it would set a bad precedent for potential competitors to point to as evidence of permission for all derivative works, which would then in turn harm the financial value of the IP. If you didn't know, Hasbro is a publicly traded company, So they have an obligation to their shareholders to always operate in the company's best financial interests. And ultimately, implicitly granting some popular fan project a license by not doing anything would be putting them in a legally risky spot that could end up negatively affecting their finances in some way. And with that said, they're also not particularly eager to just outright give anybody who asks actual licenses to use the My Little Pony IP either. Mostly because if any type of big drama or controversy happens with these now licensed fan projects, then that would in turn reflect badly upon Hasbro too, as they were the ones who gave the stamp of approval for it to continue in the first place, and are therefore partially responsible for whatever's happening. So, that is why they were, and still kind of are, more than willing to sacrifice a few MLP fan projects if it means playing things safe in terms of PR, and ensuring they continue making money as usual. Well, devil's advocate time is now officially over. The majority of cease and desists Hasbro has sent to MLP fans over the years are still extremely lame, if you ask me. Looking back on all of this, though, I must say it's honestly quite interesting to see the subtle impact these miscellaneous takedowns have had on the MLP fandom. After a while, it sort of became a small running joke in the community that some loyal working for Hasbro was constantly moments away from shutting down any MLP fan project they didn't like or whatever. But to a certain extent, there was some legitimate internal concern and hysteria among the teams behind things like MLP fan games and animations, that they would be the next victim of a cease and desist if they weren't careful. If you've ever wondered why a lot of MLP-inspired fan games don't actually contain any direct depictions of things from MLP, such as logos or even things like characters, then this is exactly why. A good example of this would be Ponytown. It's a very popular online fan game that is obviously quite strongly tied to the My Little Pony IP, but the developers behind it have taken a lot of extra precautions to remove any actual explicit references to MLP FIM in things like the menus and in-game map, in order to avoid potentially getting shut down by Hasbro. With that all being said though, in more recent years there haven't been as many fan works or projects getting taken down, which I imagine is mostly due to the MLP fandom in general not being as popular as it once was. So, as an indirect result, there have been far less popular things from the fandom infringing on Hasbro's copyright that they believe should be sent a cease and desist. So, in conclusion, these rather unique cases of Hasbro directly intervening in stuff happening in the MLP fandom itself aren't really talked about as much nowadays, but they're definitely among some of the most intriguing things that have happened in the history of the online My Little Pony community. And ultimately, I believe these cease and desists have a mixed legacy of being both quite unfortunate, but also simultaneously being quite memorable situations for so many people in the fandom. Well, that is now the end of this video. So, thanks for watching. And on that note, what are your guys' own personal thoughts on Hasbro taking down stuff from the My Little Pony fandom in this way? Keep in mind, this video was more so meant as a general overview, and not really a super detailed history of instances of it happening, so it would be cool to see what you all have to say in the comments down below. With that said, you can also go ahead and share this video around if you want, as that's one of the best ways to support me, but aside from that, I don't think I have anything else particularly interesting left to say now. So again, thanks for watching. And as always, I will see you whenever I see you.